But so we've been talking a lot about some heavy stuff, and I just want to remind y'all, we kind of touched on this yesterday, that here, I can turn my video on. Hi everybody. These are my big ass headphones. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, right? Like for those of you who are under the age of 18, and actually I don't know the age of consent in other states. So if you're calling in from Kentucky, from Tennessee, from New York, the age of consent can be different. But in California, we have different laws around mandated reporting. So mandated reporting applies, and it's really for your safety, right? If any of you disclose to us that you're being hurt by somebody else, that you're hurting yourself, or that you are going to hurt somebody, we have to report it. And it's very frustrating because that means that we can't always hold confidentiality with y'all. So we just wanted to cover that real quickly so that you know that if you ever tell us anything, know that we're still under these guidelines. And that's really for your safety, right? Like, because if something's happening to you, we want that to stop.
Yeah,
If
and
you're
the number.
experiencing any violence. Yes, and so up here in the corner of Luis's screen is our 24-hour hotline. And the reason we include that, and I think we mentioned this at orientation for those of you that were there, is if something comes up and you want to tell us, but you're not sure if it's reportable or not, first of all, you can always check with us and like say, come talk to us personally. But there's also this 24-hour hotline, which you can call. And if you don't tell them your name or location, it's 100% anonymous. So you can give them a call and work through some problems with them, and they don't have to report anything. So we're going to throw that up. We threw it up last week. We're going to keep reminding y'all that that's here for you. It's also at the bottom of our website if you go to peaceoverviolence.org. And it's a really incredible resources. We actually train the people who answer it, so they're legit. And yeah, so we just wanted to mention that before Luis gets started, and now I'm going to let him present while I drink my Sapporo coffee.
Yeah, so breaking the cycles of violence, right? So what do you all think when you hear the word cycle? What's some of the things you hear? Like, what is some of the things that come to mind when you think of the word cycle? And not like as a bicycle, but as something that happens. Yeah, can you read some of the responses?
Yes, repetition again and again, endless, crazy, something that keeps going, continuous, repeats an occurring event, repeating, repetitive, continuation.
Perfect. So yeah, today we're going to talk about cycle violence, which is the way that violence repeats itself in abusive or unhealthy relationships. So the cycle is something that keeps going, and it's applied to relationships. It's a cycle, and the cycle of violence has 3 stages, and we're going to go through all of them, and we're going to skim through some of them, and kind of show you what are the stages and what do they do and what happens in the different stage. So the first stage is called the honeymoon stage. What do you think of when you hear the word honeymoon?
Happiness, romantic, peaceful, happy, temporary niceness, short-lived happy, romance, ooh la la sounds, new relationship, leisure.
Yeah, and the first stage is the honeymoon stage, which is the initial part of a relationship, and a lot of y'all went through a lot of what it means. So every relationship has a honeymoon stage, regardless of it, if it's unhealthy or unhealthy or unhealthy. So this is a normal process of a relationship, right? The honeymoon stage, and the second stage is the tension stage, right? And what do y'all think of when you hear the word tension?
Built up anger, arguments, jealousy, about to break, tightness, afraid. hardship.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. The tension stage happens when people don't agree on things. Tension is normal in relationships, no matter whether it is with family, friends, or loved ones, because no two people are the same. For example, jealousy, insecurity are normal in a relationship. How you solve it is what determines if it is healthy or unhealthy tension. So tension and the honeymoon stage are all parts of a relationship, right? And it's the way you manage it and the way you deal with it, with some of the issues that happen, right? Um, so how do you solve tension? How would you solve tension here? Like, what would you do?
Communication.
Yeah,
Communicate, express how you feel,
yeah.
boundaries. Yeah.
So yeah, as you learn in power and control, what makes tension unhealthy is when one person has power and uses that power to have the other person succumb. So that's kind of like, you solve tension by communicating, but what creates the unhealthy tension is when a person has power in a relationship and uses that power to dominate and control somebody, right? Um, and this is where the power and control is something you learn in power and control. And I'm sure they already done that. If I'm not going ahead, I'm sorry, that's my anxiety. So yes, and uh, what are unhealthy ways of addressing tension? Like, what do you term unhealthy?
Ignoring, arguing, fighting, scapegoating, blaming each other, ignorance.
So, yeah, and in a way to a healthy way to address tension is, these sort of ways that you don't, but the healthy way to address it is that, having mutual understanding, mutual compromise, balance, healthy conversations. And sorry, the first one's supposed to be healthy and it was a typo, but the unhealthy parts are right here on the bottom. And this is, the healthy is violence, verbal abuse, which some of you all said, manipulation, cyber attacks, and sexual attacks as well. So there are healthy and unhealthy ways to address tension. And like I said, let me go back a little bit. Just went forward. And the healthy way is having a mutual understanding, mutual compromise and balance, healthy conversations. That's a healthy way. And this is supposed to say healthy right here. I apologize if it doesn't. I think I didn't catch that when I was creating this presentation. So yeah, does everyone understand that, or a little bit?
Yes. Someone's throwing in the French.
Yeah.
Yes, people are understanding.
Perfect. And then the third stage is the abuse stage. So what comes in mind when you think of the word abuse? Like, what do you think of when you hear the word abuse?
Violence, trauma, harm, physical, fighting.
Yeah.
Violent arguments.
Yeah. So yeah, abuse is when the person with power starts using physical violence, verbal attacks, rape, isolation tactics, and isolation tactics to deal with tension, right? So the tension leads to the abuse, and these are some ways that people who commit the abuse do it and handle it, right? So since it's a cycle, what happens after the abuse stage right here? Can anyone answer that? So this is a cycle.
Repeats.
Yeah.
Reconciliation.
Yep, they're all great. So it repeats itself and it moves to the honeymoon stage again, right? So it's the cycle. This is what happens. And what does the honeymoon stage look like after there has been abuse for some of y'all? And what do you think it looks like?
Never-ending cycle.
So
begging,
what is this?
Timid.
Yeah, they bring flowers. You can buy gifts. They tell you what you want to hear. They say sorry, and this starts all over again, right? This is some of the things they'll do, and this is what it could look like in based of like actions on behalf of the abuser to get back into the honeymoon stage. Now, are these actions sincere? Do you all think that these actions are sincere?
No, 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 no.
No, they're gonna say and do whatever it takes to keep control and remain in power, right? So no, they're not sincere. So that's a good answer, everybody. Why? Because they're not trying to balance things out or be held accountable, right? And this is why they're not sincere. Sincere, somebody who's sincere would want to go through the process of being held accountable and balance the relationship out, right? And you know, if you notice in relationships, the balance in relationships shifts all the time, and that's normal because trying to maintain that balance is what, in a healthy manner, is what we usually should be doing in relationships. But in the cycle of violence, it doesn't happen. So eventually, this is just like putting a band-aid right on top of a broken leg and acting like things are normal, even though they are not. And what usually happens when you do that? What happens when you keep trying to walk on that leg? Anyone?
More pain, it gets worse, makes it worse, it weakens. Also, Yoko, can you throw that question in the Q&A? It hurts, it doesn't heal, injures more.
Yeah. So you need to feel tension again, end up in the tension stage again, right? And this is my favorite soccer player, and he's feeling tension in the knee, because it hurts, and he's down and out, right? So I added this as a prop to make it less boring. Hopefully that works. But yeah, right, there's tension building up, and you can see it here, and eventually it ends up in the tension stage. So what happens this time during the tension stage?
Things get heated, arguments.
Yeah. The person who's being abused, they have to pay attention to what they're doing because they're afraid of their partner's response. They begin to walk on eggshells. Does anyone know what that means? Yeah, so they begin to walk on eggshells, which means not knowing what's going to happen, to trigger their partner into going back to the abuse stage. So walking on eggshells is when somebody kind of maneuvers around somebody to not, are more careful and mindful of how they navigate space or a relationship because they're afraid it might go back to like abuse, right? And you see this happen in a lot of relationships. And this is something that happens in the cycle of violence and in abusive relationships as well. So after the abuse stage, where does the cycle end up again? I mean, it goes back to the abuse after the tension stage. It goes back to the abuse stage. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So the cycle ends up back in the abuse stage after the tension is building again, right? And an important thing to notice is that the cycle looks different in every relationship. Sometimes the stages last longer and sometimes they are shorter. So there's like no linear way of how these like time frame for how these stages work, right? So it goes back to the abuse stage after there's tension again, right? Because the unhealthy aspects of the relationship are not being addressed in a way that's constructive and in a way that's healthy. So over time, what happens to the honeymoon stage? Does anyone know? Anyone replying? So
Jasmine, can you throw that question in the Q&A? If y'all have questions, can you throw them in the Q&A? That way they don't get lost in the chat. And these are some very good questions. Sorry, it becomes shorter and shorter. It's fleeting. Over time, the honeymoon stage isn't even there anymore. Amani, are you taking us?
It starts to disappear until it's gone completely, right? So it goes completely and then it just goes back and forth between tension and abuse now, right? That's what happens over time. And does anyone know why the honeymoon stage disappears? Like why, what causes that?
Why does the honeymoon stage go away? No empathy, broken trust, no going back.
Yeah. The abuser has established enough power that they don't need to go back to the honeymoon stage, right? They have enough control, power and control over their partner, and there's really no need to go back for them to kind of address or even perform, right? Um, that they care or that they're trying to fix things. It just they have established full power over a person. So, yeah, the person does not need to shower you with gifts. They do not need to apologize because they already have the power, and a pattern has been established. So, a pattern has been established, right? So this is all a pattern, and when a pattern is also established, it reduces the honeymoon stage. And what do you think? What do you think happens next with the abuse stage during this time? Now that there's no honeymoon stage.
Endless violence.
Yep.
Becomes more violent. The person takes advantage.
The abuse starts to escalate, happens more, or it becomes more severe, right? That's what happens. So I'm gonna do an exercise. I'm gonna read this poem. It's called "David Brings Me Flowers." It's part of the or curriculum as well. It's in the youth institute curriculum. I was gonna do something cooler, but I just didn't know how to play videos as a presenting, so I didn't. So sorry if this is not as cool, but it's a simple poem. It's called "David Brings Me Flowers" and it's anonymous, right? So I'm gonna read this and I'm gonna ask you all what kind of you're getting from that, right? So the first line, Hannah, you could want to help me. I don't know.
Me?
Reading.
Reading?
That's good.
Oh, with my English Shakespearean voice. Okay.
Yeah, poems. So yeah, poems sound better with the English accent, I think.
No, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it.
That's what the TV tells me.
David brings me flowers. No, okay. Do you want me to read it?
Let's read one line and one line each. So it sounds more engaging.
You go first.
David brings me flowers.
And he tells me he loves me.
And I want to believe him.
My friends say I'm stupid.
But they don't know David.
David brings me flowers.
And he tells me he's sorry.
When he loses his temper.
And accidentally hits me.
My friends say I'm stupid.
But they don't know David.
David hit me last night.
And I thought he wouldn't stop.
It all seems like a blur.
And my friends, they were right.
But David brings me flowers.
Yes, so this is kind of a poem. What do you all get from this poem? Like, what are you all noticing from this poem?
It sounds like the girl's in denial because she loves David. Folks are saying that their heart's broken. The sadness. Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. My soul has been crushed. The honeymoon stage is what keeps her there. Sadness. She's blinded by love. There's repetition.
Yeah, all of those things are right, right? So what would you do if you were David's friend? What would you say to him?
I would tell him to leave.
Okay. And what would you say to his partner if they were your friend?
Tell them to end the relationship. Are the flowers worth the abuse? You deserve better. This is not a healthy relationship. To think before acting. Tell her she can leave. I would tell him to get help. I would tell him to go to a facility that can help him. First of all, can I just point out, I love that everyone's like assigning a different gender to the speaker of this poem, right? And like part of the intention of this poem is that we don't define the gender of the speaker, right? And that's really important because I think it allows ourselves to see us as the victim, right? But also it highlights that violence is something that people experience regardless of gender, right? I mean, I think POV could have done a better job of choosing David as the name. But yeah, right, like there is no gender of the speaker.
Yeah, and the whole presentation is also genderless for that reason. That's why I refer to as partner and abuse, just so everybody could, you know, feel it, right? Because abuse comes from, like Hannah said, anyone could be an abuser or be abusive, right? So to the next stage. This is what not to do, and some of the answers, right, that I heard. So what not to do is blame individuals for staying in the relationship. Understand that the cycle is very hard to leave, and it is common for people to stay or keep going back, right? So what this does, when you don't blame individuals, like what you want to do instead is ask, why does a person stay, right? Instead of blaming individuals. Am I correct? So people stay because they have kids, maybe, right? Religion, sometimes it's against religion to have a divorce or remarried and might be shunned, right? So these are all reasons why you shouldn't blame the victim sometimes, you know, like during this cycle of violence. Fear, intimidation, being hurt, they're scared to be hurt. Peer pressure from family, sometimes it happens, you see it with family, right? They're like, why are you leaving him? He's a good guy. They don't really see anything. Like, you got to do is make things better. So they victim blame as well, right? Undocumented status. Sometimes people are going through a green card process, or they're scared to be deported, or they find some kind of safety net and someone who might be a citizen. And this person holds power over them with that, right? That's holding power, with their status, right? So yeah. Shift away from victim blaming and instead place accountability on the abuser, because that's the whole point, right? We're trying to. The reason why the relationship got caught up in the cycle is because the abuser did not want to be held accountable or have a process to really change and their actions in a way that's substantial and it doesn't lead to this cycle, right? So that's why it's always good to place accountability on the abuser. And now that we understand how difficult it can be to leave an abusive relationship, how would you support or talk to someone who is in one? Yeah, I've seen some of those stuff coming in. You could help me, thanks.
Offer to help them to find a place to live. Tell them to help.
Yeah, listen, right? The main part is listening. Validate their feelings, you know, let them know they're not alone. Let them know that you understand, that their feelings are valid, even if they try to justify going back. You know, try to validate what they're saying in themselves, you know, give them that agency. Send them links to sources and readings that may help them kind of like, you know, figure out what's going on. There's a lot of good books out there I love that I enjoy too, that, you know, kind of give you like a good insight of how these cycles happen and how to get out of them. Asking the thought of resources and outside help. So always ask them questions, you know, that also helps. And yeah, so these are some of the ways. And did I miss anything, Hannah, for the Q&A?
No, there's more questions in the Q&A, so I'm gonna go into them real quick. But yeah. So thank you all. Thank you, Luis. That was great. You know, it's important that we understand the cycle because so much of our culture involves victim blaming, right? I remember, like, there's just such a misunderstanding of what domestic violence is and what teen dating violence is. And there's often like this one response when we find out someone's in an unhealthy or abusive relationship, right? Like there's this one hit and I'd be out the door, right? Like, oh, my man, my whoever would never treat me that way, right? Like I'd be I'd leave them in a second. Like, have some self-respect, blah, 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 blah. And I think, first of all, those responses are based in fear, right? Like, it's scary for us to envision that this is something that's so widely spread and that we could experience. And also, it's a complete misunderstanding of this cycle, right? What I often point out in the cycle is that an abuser doesn't show up to the first date with a bat.
Yeah.
Right? That's not how this works, right? There's intimacy, there's connection that's built, right? And that's why the honeymoon stage is so important. And
unless
then
the first date is a baseball playing game date. So
yes, then maybe they might finger bat. Okay. But they're not going to use it against, right? Like, the point is, like, no abuser shows their violence the first time you meet them, right? Like, it's something that is later revealed, and that's intentional, right? Because if you just meet someone, right, and they are being disrespectful to you, they're hurting you, right? Like, they're being verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, you'd be like, okay, fuck you, I'm leaving, right? But once you've fallen in love with someone, right, once you've built that connection, it's very hard to disconnect from this person. And I just like to point out that this honeymoon stage can be anywhere from like a few days, a few months, a year, to multiple years. I once worked with a woman who was married to her husband for 12 years before she recognized the first sign of abuse, right? He started gaslighting her. And they had kids together. They had 2 kids together. And so once she started noticing that they were abusing her emotionally by gaslighting her, by making her question her own experience, right? She still had children with this person, right? So it makes it really hard to break that connection, because that connection and that love is still there, right? So it's just really important that we understand how this cycle plays out. And then
yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go off.
Yeah, so no, yeah, and this is why sometimes, abuse can look different ways. Like some abuse is harder to identify. There's verbal and physical abuse. There's also the overbearing abuse of like an overbearing mom that cares too much.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like this. That's also a form of abuse. Like, I do everything for you. So nice.
Like a helicopter. Like, yeah, there's over, like, any type of control, right? Whether that be a type of control that you're saying is you're doing for their well-being, right? Yeah. So that's an excuse that multiple abusers use, right? Like, I'm only trying to protect you, right? I'm only trying to look out for you. That's why, like, I need to know, like, you need to share your location with me. That's why I need to have access to your passwords. That's why, like, I won't let you go get a job, right? That's why I won't let you walk to school and to your classes by yourself, right? Like, all of these things, the excuses are rampant, right? There's so many different excuses, but any type of controlling behavior is a warning sign. And actually, remember, on Thursday, we're going to talk all about warning signs and like more types of abuse.
Yeah, thank you. And just just know that some of the things it concerns relationships like jealousy, insecurity, arguing, those things are natural to relationships. It's just how they're handled that becomes the issue and what leads to the cycle, right? Like I've mentioned earlier in the presentation, that most of the relationships go through these tension and honeymoon stages, but they deal with it differently in a healthy way. Tension is normal in any relationship. It happens all the time. And I'm in any kind of relationship, coworker, friends, family. It's just when it gets to abuse, and when attention is gaslighting, that's when it becomes a problem, right? And this is why it's good to understand the cycle, so you could we can collectively become better at the way we engage in relationships with each other. So yeah.
Speaking of gaslighting, someone asked, what is gaslighting? So let's define that.
So gaslighting comes from a term from a movie called Gaslighting. And the background is that this guy kept messing with the lights, and I think his wife was like, "What's happening?" He's like, "I don't know. I don't know who's doing that." So he was messing with her, and causing all this mental stress, and then kind of like denying it and like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So in a relationship, it looks more like, it puts the blame on you. So for example, it could be as small as somebody being like, "Hey, you're being dismissive," and be like, "How am I dismissive? Like, I'm listening now. You know, I'm talking to you now." So they could say stuff like that, or it could be as bad as like like sometimes there's apps on the phone that turn on the light and turn off the light from your house, and you can't tell. Like you don't tell your partner that you have that or whatever, and then you're turning off the lights and on, and then they're like, "Hey," you come home and they're like, "Hey, I think I'm tripping. The lights are going on now." And he's like, "I don't know what's going on. Yeah, it's weird." So that's also a form of gaslighting, right? It's when you do something that's abusive, and then you kind of like you just lay away from it, or you like pretend like you don't know.
The simplest definition I've ever heard is like it's someone making you question your own experience of reality, right? So it's say Luis and I are having a conversation, and I say like, "Yeah, Luis, I'll pick you up from the airport," right? And then he's waiting at the airport, and I'm not there, and I say, "What are you talking about? I never said I would do that. Like, what are you talking? You're crazy. I would never go to the airport. Like, what are you talking about? I would never do that," right? So it's like like it's something to be true, but you're lying and making this person question their own reality, right? Because now Luis's response is going to be, "Wait, did I make that up? Was that a dream? Like, wait, I swore she said that," right? Like, so then you start questioning your own experience.
Yeah, and it's one of the worst feelings ever when you experience it.
Oh, it's terrible. And friends can also gaslight 100%. Anyone's right. Whenever we're talking about unhealthy behaviors, any abusive tactics, anyone can do this to anybody. Once I remember like when after this new president was elected, someone wrote an article that said like Trump is gaslighting America, right? And that's a great example. Politicians gaslight us all the time, right? They say like they run on I don't know if y'all know much about the current head of the sheriff department in Los Angeles. He ran on a campaign where he was like, he's going to reform the sheriff's department. He was like, you got to vote for me. People were like really supporting him. The second he got elected, he's been the most trash sheriff deputy that we've ever seen, right? Like he reinstated someone accused of domestic violence, like all these things. So he literally ran a campaign saying he would do something. And then now we say, "Hey, remember you said you were going to do this?" He's like, "What are you talking about?" Right? So like politicians gaslight us. We gaslight, and we can gaslight ourselves even sometimes, right? Like you can be like, "Wait, did I say that?" So again, it's a very common emotional and psychological abuse tactic.
And once you understand the abusive part of, you learn to identify gaslighting. Like, who would have ever thought that a sheriff would have been good? Or like, what's it gonna be good? And that's you played yourself.
Yeah, we played ourselves for having hope. Okay, so so I have a few. Like we have actually 7 questions. It is real quick. Jasmine said, "Is it similar to manipulation?" Yes, it's a type of manipulation, right? So we have a few more questions. I want to go through these 7 actually. So first, I'm going to answer Jasmine's, which is why is it so hard to break the cycle? Do you want to answer, or do you want me to answer, Luis?
You go first.
Okay, here I go. it's really hard to break this cycle because of that honeymoon period, right? So just put yourself in someone's shoes, right? Like imagine that you meet this person and you go on a date and you've been looking for a relationship for a while and you're on this date and this person is so caring. They're asking questions about you, right? They show that they're engaged in the conversation, right? They're listening, they're actively listening, they're responding. Then you like continue to date this person, right? And you build this connection with this person. And then say, you get married to this person, right? And you have a kid with this person. And maybe you decide I'll be the stay-at-home parent, right? So you're building this life and they go to work and you have this child. Now say they start to become controlling and jealous, right? Their jealousy leads to them saying they need to have your password, right? Like you shouldn't be hanging out with those friends you've been speaking to, right? Like that's too much. And then they hit you, right? And again, the point of the cycle of violence is violence escalates, right? The first act of violence is not necessarily going to be the most violent, right? It may look like they shout at you, right? Which we see people shout at each other all the time. So maybe you think it's normal to be shouted at, screamed at. Then the next time you argue, they punch the wall, right? Then everything goes back to normal and they apologize. They say, I'm sorry, I've just been so stressed out at work. It's been like really a lot to handle. Like, I'm really, really sorry, it won't happen again. Then the next time they punch you, right? So violence escalates. So we start to think maybe that this is just how relationships are, right? But you also realize that you're financially connected to this person, right? Like if you don't have your own money, how are you going to raise your child without this person? Maybe you want your child to, sorry, my dog is like snoring. Do you hear her? It's kind of distracting. I'm like trying to concentrate, but she's snoring. Anyway, the point is, right, there's so many different reasons it's hard for the cycle to break. But I also want to point out that the cycle, it takes victims 7 times to leave their abuser, right? So like we're talking about this cycle. So maybe the first time they're being screamed at and they go, I don't deserve this. Then the next time they're punched and they go, I think I gotta get out. But then they leave and they realize that they love this person, that they miss them, right? Because what's key is that in an abusive relationship, you don't want the relationship to stop. You want the violence to stop, right? That's the key, is you've built a life with this person maybe, right? You've grown connected to them. You've met their family, right? You've spent years with this person, maybe months, day, whatever, right? And then the violence happens. What victims say time and time again is that, oh, I just wanted him to go back to how he was. I just wanted her to go back to how she was before it got like this, right? So you don't want to break the relationship, you want to break the violence. Sorry, my dog's snoring really got to.
So, and that's what makes it hard because, you know, I think like Hannah covered all of it well. I don't have anything substantial to say after that, but yes. And there's another question, right?
Oh, there's a lot of questions.
How do abusers hold themselves accountable? Is that one of them?
Yeah, how do abusers hold themselves accountable?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you want, and it's really hard when people don't want to recognize the pattern and hold themselves accountable. It takes a community process. It takes a lot of work. It's a very hard answer because there's no real defined way. We're still navigating because the current system we live under doesn't really hold people accountable. It disposes of people mostly, either through jails or other things, right? So we don't have a system that kind of really facilitates that in a systemic way. But we do have community, and and we do have each other to be there, and it could be a process, a group process, and just understand that sometimes a lot of people who are abusers are coming from a background of abuse and trauma as well, and generational you will replicate that, and it's up to us to break that cycle as well, because the cycle is also generational as well. So that's and understanding that, it doesn't mean a person is bad. It means a person can change. People do bad actions, yes, and for this, there's a line where you draw that some people are bad, but it doesn't mean that everybody is bad, and it doesn't make the person as bad. So I think most people are really kind of like shield themselves from accountability because they see it as they're wrong and bad, right? And as long as we help them understand that they're not bad. Like I have dealt with friends who have been physically abusive with partners, and I have approached it in a way like, hey, this doesn't make you bad, and you're caught up in a toxic place, and none of your, and it goes both ways, right? Because sometimes abuse can be like, there'll be people fighting each other and both be physical with each other, right? And I usually offer ultimatums, like when it gets bad, I'm like, hey, you can't be with this person. It's bad, and it's keeping you in the cycle of you're being abusive and they're being abusive, and it's bad. And if you go back, I'm not gonna cut you off completely off my life, and I don't want to hear from you. So you got to so that's the kind of approach I take sometimes with some of my friends. But that's after I walked them through and I talked to them about like, hey, this doesn't mean you're a bad person. There's some shit that happens, but don't do it again. And you could make it better and not replicate these things that take over your life or keep happening. And that's what I'm saying. It becomes really difficult because our current society disposes of people. So what happens is people put people in jail, and then in jail they experience more abuse and more trauma, and then they come back more fucked up than they went in. And it happens a lot. Sometimes, people get deported and they go to the other countries and they replicate all of this back home in the communities as well, right? So we kind of push the issues around and we don't really address it. So it's a long process, and we're still figuring out how to do it. But the most effective way I have seen it done is through community accountability process and steps, and demands that are being met step by step. And that's what you call restorative justice. So that's ultimately the term. So I think through a restorative justice method is a good way to hold people accountable, because it addresses the root causes and issues, and it creates a process for people to be better.
Yeah, I also, restorative justice is the way, right? Yeah, like we don't want to dispose of people, but the key thing too is, right, like the abuser has to want to do the work, right? Like and I think a few questions are asking this, right? Like we can't control what other people do. As much as we want to, we cannot control what other people do, right? Same with victims and same with abusers, right? We might, as an outsider, say your friend is going through something similar and you notice that it's an abusive relationship. You can say you gotta leave them, dump their ass, like leave, right? You deserve better. I think if you haven't experienced this already, you will one day. Your friend is gonna make the decision they make, right? Like, and no matter what you say, they have to be ready to make the change. And it's the same with abusers. Abusers have to want to do the work. And all we can do is provide them options, educate, like Luis was saying, like he educates his friends. He says, what you're demonstrating is this, right? Like that's gaslighting, that's this, you educate. But you have to understand that people are going to make change if they want to make change. So that's key too, right? Like we have to just call stuff out, name it for what it is, offer them resources, right? Say like, I want to help you through this, but if they don't take us up on that, we can't get mad. We just have to stay with them.
And, and this is good to understand. The cycle of violence also helps understanding, because it helps you, like, also cut off your access that you might be perpetrating as well. And it happens to me, like when I start yelling at my partner, when I have one, I don't, hypothetically, when I started yelling at my partner and I get pissed and I'm shouting, I just stay in this relationship as much as I could, try to fix things, and then it just becomes, we become toxic for each other, right? And now I learned to see it. I'm like, oh, this person kind of, some of the things they're doing doesn't align with me, and it escalates me to a certain way I don't want, like being at. And that's when I decided not to be in a relationship, So it also helps you understand a way to address it yourself if you're someone that might be perpetrating a cycle of violence, right? And it doesn't mean that you can escalate to abuse, but you see the patterns to get there and how they're going, or you see some patterns, right? Like I've had partners punch me in the face, and I'm like, whoa, and as a reaction, you were like, oh shit, I want to fight somebody, but you got to check yourself and then just address those patterns. Like, all right, this is abusive, it's escalating, I'm out. And that's kind of, and that gets really hard. It takes a lot of work, internal work. Like I'm not perfect at it yet, but I'm way better than I was like 2 years ago, even 2 years ago. So yeah, so this is why it's important.
Okay, so let's get through, because it is 12, so I want to get through all these questions as quickly as we can. Do you think people overlook the fact that women can be abusive too? 100%, right? So anybody can be an abuser and anybody can be a victim. Now, do we know that the majority, like what I think is very interesting, right? Like in these conversations, we never want to erase someone's experience. Anyone can be a victim of violence, right? And anyone can be a perpetrator of violence. But in our society, what we have seen is that the majority of perpetrators against men, women, non-binary people, trans people is men, right? So while women can be abusers 100%, that might look a little different than it does when a man is an abuser, right? Like women often use more of the gaslighting and emotional abuse, whereas men use physical more often, right? But that's not to say that doesn't happen. But yes, we know that when men go to report domestic violence, if they ever report, most men do not because they question their own experience. But if they do report, we know that the response is usually like, you're being abused by a woman? Like, okay, like get over yourself, right? Like we know there's dismissive responses. But yes, women can be perpetrators 100%.
Yeah, and it has to do mostly with the fact that we live in a patriarchal society, and patriarchy is a way of thinking, and there's a way that we see dominance as being established, so anybody could replicate these, and most of the cycles of abuse happening on men are on behalf of patriarchy, and the way that when women and other people do it is because they're replicating and also establishing a patriarchal mindset, and that's also like it all stems from the same issue, right? And I was gonna put a quote on that on patriarchy on this presentation, and I just remember that I didn't, but I should have.
The king of quotes. That's you. Okay. Is it possible the apology is sincere? Maybe they are sick and they truly do feel sorry.
Once it's a cycle, I think once it hits a certain level, once it becomes a cycle, like more than once, I would doubt sincereness. So like, I don't know, like what some people's threshold is, but once it goes through the cycle and it comes back to honeymoon, and if it's done that already like twice, I'll kind of question sincereness. And it depends how the abuse happens. Like if it was physical, during not even the second round, the first round of the cycle, and it was physical during the abuse and then the apology, I would definitely rethink those, and I wouldn't advise for anybody to stick with somebody who already was physical in the initial stages and the initial cycle, not several cycles, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that there can be sincere apologies, but
But I want to point out, like, remember last week we talked about violence and our definition of violence, right? Intention doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what someone's intention is, right? Like, if they're like, I'm sorry, like, I don't mean it, doesn't matter. They still committed violence, right? So violence and intention, we need to separate those two things, right? Because yes, we are not given the tools that we need to have healthy, beautiful relationships, right? Like, we are not taught these things. And while that's frustrating, that does not excuse violence, right? Like, I often use the example of Brock Turner, the rapist, the Stanford rapist, right? Did he learn about consent in school? Did he like have all the tools he needed, right, to not commit that act? No, but also he still committed an act of violence, right? Like, we have to hold these two things at the same time. So whether they are upset, and the thing is, right, like, we've talked about this cycle, how people will try to leave their violent relationship. Victims will try to leave 7 times, but they usually go back, right? On the 7th time, they either successfully leave the relationship or they are killed, right? Violence escalates. The amount of women in this country who have been killed because of domestic violence is staggering, right? And it's very, very rarely attributed to domestic violence, right? Or classified as an act of domestic violence. In Los Angeles alone, an article came out last year by the LA Times in which they said, right, like, Los Angeles has had a long history of violence, right? Because, of course, like, we've talked about the roots of violence, but crime rates have gone down in Los Angeles. Historic lows, right? There are historic lows of crime in Los Angeles. And yet, domestic violence has gone up, right? So it's important that we understand, and of course, men are killed at the hands of domestic violence as well, right? But it's important that we understand that this is something that's lethal. Domestic violence is lethal. It is killing people. And so it's important that we acknowledge that. So again, whether it's sincere or not, it's still an act of violence, right? And again, like we've been saying, if they don't want to change, then they're not going to change, right? Like, if you say you're in a relationship, right? And then there's some tension and a person screams and then they go, oh my God, I'm sorry, that was not okay. I just realized I don't have the tools to communicate my frustration or my issues, right? Like, I'm gonna go take some workshops, That would be an effective response, right?
Yeah.
Healthy behaviors.
And we have some bunch of questions that are really important, and I don't know how many people are on. And I'm reading through them right now. Thanks. Yeah, and I got to finish that answer. Top of that answer is the sincereness looks when there's accountability process, right? That's like a good step to address it. So the only way I would measure sincereness is if they're willing to go through an accountability process, and the sincereness doesn't have to result in the on and together as well. It could be like a accountability process for themselves to move on and be better for other people, and it shouldn't be something that it's going to be like a give and take. Like, I'm doing this so we could be together. You hear that a lot, right? That's also abusive. Ultimately, that's up to you if you want to continue being with somebody after the accountability process. So yeah.
Okay.
Hannah, there's a bunch of questions here, and I feel like some of them could be answered together.
Yes, I think so. I think we just kind of answered Christine's question, which is, do you guys believe that there are some abusers who don't realize what they're doing, or do you think all of them know what they're doing, right? And again, the key is that we may know what they're doing. There are some that are intentionally manipulative, right? And then of course there are some that this is how they don't know what is a healthy relationship and not a healthy relationship. Again, the intention doesn't matter. If there's violence, right? What could you do if the victim refuses to listen?
Like, if the victim refuses to listen, there are measures.
Well, yeah, I think it just goes back to what we were talking about before. Like, you cannot make someone do something, right? Like everyone is the expert on their own experience, right? So even if you from the outside are saying dump his ass, like do this, you need to leave, you need to get your bank account, blah blah blah. We can't control what other people do. So if they don't listen, they don't listen, right? All you can do is continue to be there for that person, to continue to help them, connect them, like work through things with them, right? Because another key thing is one of the main tactics abusers use is isolation, right? So like disconnecting you from your peers, your group. And so you have to just continue the work and investing in that person. Okay. I think, what if the abuser has been abusive since day one and has begun to harm others to the point their kids had to be removed from the environment?
I mean, these kind of, like I said, this kind of go back to like you can't really make people do anything to get out of it. Ultimately, that's up to them. If the kids are being removed from the environment and they're not seeing that as an issue to leave the relationship, it's obviously, they're really caught up in this cycle. But like I said, there's not real avenues, right? Like most people call police, they do certain things, but they don't, like calling police can be dangerous for many reasons, but mostly because the partner might be mad that they call the police and then it escalates to abuse again. So there's like, it's just a cycle, right? So this is what the best thing you could do is be there, supportive, give them little information and some of the tools for them to be able to do it themselves as much as possible. Even if you don't see the results right away, or you're not seeing any progress right away, just that's the best. I don't know, like, I don't know what else can be done outside of their own will, or being able to do it themselves.
I'm also gonna put in the chat right now a hotline, right? And as a reminder, this hotline you can call for advice on specific situations too, right? It's a trained professional at the end of the line. You don't have to reveal who you are. You can just say like, I'm not gonna tell you my name or address, but I just need support in this situation, and tell them the specifics, right? Okay, let's see. What about the relationship where if you try to leave, they threaten your life? That's very common, right? Again, a lot of domestic violence ends in death, right? So it really depends. But again, that's why safety planning is important, right? If this is anything anyone's experiencing, call the hotline. They can help you safety plan. If you know someone or you yourself are trying to leave an abusive relationship and you're worried about your life or safety planning is key. And a trained professional can help you do that, right? By calling the hotline.
Yeah, and that's, if they're showing signs that they want to leave but they're scared, you could also obviously offer tangible solutions for them to feel safe and get out of it. I had a friend, helped a friend out once, and little things I did was like, switch them, like switch cars somewhere hidden, so make sure that they're not being followed by the abuser. And like, there's a lot of things, some things you can do to help if they're interested in getting out, but being threatened. Those are things that we could also collectively learn to do ourselves, and also get help for.
Okay.
Did you guys?
If a parent is an abuser, right, like similar thing, that's also a very specific situation. And a hotline can help with that as well. But it's really important that safety planning is achieved, right? So again, everything is a case by case, right? There's no one response to any type of domestic violence, right? Which is why it's really helpful to call a hotline. If they're threatening with taking their life, that's a very common manipulation tool, right? So if they're saying like, if you leave me, I'll kill myself. If you leave me, I'll kill the dog. If you leave me, I'll kill our kid, right? Like, again, that's a high risk situation, high fatality situation, and you would want to call a hotline and get support and safety planning, right? But again, you cannot ever, there's no excuse for violence, right? And that's a form of manipulation. Okay, y'all, we are gonna, it's 12:16, so I wanna let everybody know, we've answered most of the questions. Again, every situation is different, which is why it's helpful to always know that there's anonymous hotlines out there to help work through any specific individual experience. I've put that hotline on the chat, but it's also on our Instagram, right? And so for now, I'm gonna still open it up if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything. Yes, there's gonna be afternoon real talk. It's not mandatory, it's optional. We're gonna have Jocelyn and Monique lead us in a real talk activity. Like, we're gonna like have some prompts and discussions. Yeah, and then if not, we'll see you Wednesday.
Yeah, and before we leave, to clarify, I think there's some chat. Mental health abusers struggle for mental health. We all do. It's part of the reason why, you know, a lot of abusers and people get caught up in this cycles, because they have unaddressed mental health issues and trauma as well. So it's not uncommon. It's very common for mental health to be involved with all of this. It's actually very common. So,
yeah.
It's not an excuse for it, and that's what I'm saying. It's very common, but it's not an excuse. And we all have mental issues that we all have to address. We all come from traumatic, you know, backgrounds. Not all of us, but many of us. And I'm probably speaking for myself, but yeah. That's pretty much it. I think there's one more Q&A somebody asked. Will the afternoon session be from 2 to 4:30?
It should be in your email. I don't know. Let me check. Today it's in your little calendar. Yeah, it's 2:30 to 4.
Right. Thanks for sitting through this. Sorry for the difficulties. It's my first time doing this one, and I did it online and not in person. So.
You did amazing. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you either this afternoon or tomorrow. Bye, y'all.